and then special order speeches. Live coverage of the House next here on C-SPAN.
To suspend the rules previously postponed, votes will be taken in the following order: H.R. 570 and H.R. 525, in each case by the yeas and nays. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is the vote to the motion of the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 570, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 12, H.R. 570, a bill to amend the Public Health Service Act to enhance the roles of dentists and allied dental personnel in the nation's disaster response framework and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
Just two votes on the House floor, both of them dealing with designating, one designating dentists, the other veterinarians in emergency response situations. A 15-minute vote to start things off here on this Tuesday evening. Earlier today, House Republicans held a news conference about terror suspects at Guantanamo Bay. Armed Services Committee Chairman Buck McKeon of California and 6 other Republicans said today they're going to introduce legislation that would limit legal representation for detainees and permanently block money to build or renovate a U.S. facility there. This after the Obama administration announced their policy on Guantanamo yesterday. I'm going to show you that news conference during this first 15-minute vote.
Good afternoon. I'm Buck McKeon from California 25th District. Is this on?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? And I'm gathered here today by several members of the Armed Services Committee to discuss our belief that a careful and comprehensive plan is needed for dealing with the law of war detention for terrorists. While we're not going to detain our way out of the threats we face, law of war detention is a critical tool necessary to neutralize terrorists and obtain valuable intelligence. Previously, in President Obama's speech at the National Archives in May of 2009, he made a commitment to come together and create a path forward with Congress. Unfortunately, that has not happened. Instead, the White House did exactly the opposite yesterday by emphasizing executive authority and leveling significant criticism toward Congress and calling our actions dangerous. We've seen this show before. What I believe is dangerous are terrorists who wish to harm the United States. We have serious concerns about the substance of President Obama's executive sanction order creating a new review procedure for the Guantanamo detainees. Mr. Rooney will discuss these concerns in further detail. Yesterday, President Obama also announced the resumption of military commissions at Guantanamo. This is an important step toward moving forward with a law of war focus instead of prioritizing law enforcement. However, notably absent yesterday was any reference to the disposition of the 9/11 case. Tomorrow, or shortly, we will be introducing legislation to deal with the most significant problems raised by the executive order and other detainee-related issues. In the days ahead, we're going to be working closely with Ranking Member Smith and other Republican and Democratic members to make this a bipartisan fix. My colleagues are going to talk about various aspects of the legislation that we'll be introducing shortly and the concerns we share. Then we'll take some questions. First, we'll hear from Mr. Thornberry, then Mr. Forbes, Mr. Whitman, Mr. Rooney, Mr. Schilling, and Mr. Griffin.
Mac Thornberry from the 13th District of Texas. Our view is that the time has come to deal with a lot of these issues straight on, not put a Band-Aid over it, not give a wink and a nod and do one thing and say another, but to deal with them head on. One of those issues is the authorization for the use of force, which, as you'll recall, was passed by Congress in September 2001 and really focused on those who were responsible for the 9/11 attacks. So part of what this bill does is to recognize that the world has changed some in the last 10 years, that as we have put more pressure on Al-Qaeda Central, then various offshoots and affiliates have sprouted out in various places around the world. And this bill makes it clear that we are engaged in a continuing armed conflict and that the President is authorized to detain those who are a part of or supporting Al-Qaeda, Taliban, and associated forces engaged in hostilities against the United States. Now, this approach is along the lines that both the Bush and Obama administration have actually been pursuing. This approach is along the lines of the D.C. Circuit Court opinions, but we think it's important to put it into law and make it clear, and that's what this legislation will do.
I'm Randy Forbes from Virginia's 4th Congressional District. As the Chairman and Mr. Thornberry both said, this piece of legislation is important because it's time that we move on. One of the things the executive order that the President has issued shows us is the difficulty we have when we introduce politics into national security, and also it showed us the importance of having a consistency when we're dealing with the Guantanamo issue. One of the things we need to remember is when the President issued his first executive order, it didn't just delay this action so that we could think about it and contemplate it, but one of the serious effects it had was if you went down to Guantanamo and talked to the chief prosecutor, he had assembled one of the best teams this country had ever seen to prosecute the worst terrorists that had ever hit the United States, the defendants in the 9/11 terrorist attack. That prosecutor told us and would have told the President, would have told Mr. Holder, that he had been working for over 18 months, gone through 50-some different motions and hearings in court, and would have had guilty pleas, according to him, from all of the defendants within 6 months. That order that was issued in January, before anyone even went down and inspected the situation, not only stopped the prosecution, but it dismantled all of the teams that had been put together. It dismantled all of the motions that had taken place, all of the prosecution that had taken place since that time. So not only did we lose 18 months of prosecuting the worst terrorist this country had ever seen, but we've now been delayed from that time to today with no decision. We think it's important that we have this piece of legislation to send a clear message to the administration and to terrorists across the world that we are going to prosecute these matters, we're going to prosecute them efficiently, and it's time that we move on and get that job done.
I'm Rob Whitman, representing Virginia's 1st District, and in addition to some of the concerns that you've heard here, there are a number of concerns about the threats that detainees place when they're either transferred to another country or proposed to be transferred to places here in the United States. And we know that we are dealing with new and emerging threats with terrorists around the world, but the concern is, how are we dealing with the transfer of our current detainees? And our legislation would prohibit those detainees from being transferred to the United States, would put that actually in law, but also what it would do is to permanently limit transfers to other countries exclusive of the security issues that those countries can demonstrate that they would put in place if they were to receive those detainees. We want to make sure those detainees don't end up back in the battlefield. And that's some of the concerns as you look at recidivism there and how we're dealing with that issue. This would clearly define, how do we address that? How do we make sure that those countries that we might have agreements with to transfer those detainees aren't places where they could re-enter efforts of terrorism or re-enter the battlefield? Those are things that are significantly being addressed by this bill, and ultimately our goal is to ensure the safety and security of our constituents, the American people, and we believe firmly that this will put into law the ability for us to be able to address those issues of security with detainees in their movement, whether it's here in the United States or to other countries abroad.
Good afternoon. I'm Tom Rooney from Florida's 16th District, also a former member of the Army JAG Corps, although I don't speak for the Army. I speak as a member of the Armed Services Committee in favor of this legislation. As Chairman McKeon referenced in his opening, I want to touch on just a few of the points that there may be cause for concern for those of us that are signatories of this legislation as of now. The first is with regard to the habeas cases. The Gitmo detainees already enjoy unlimited access to attorneys and are able to take full advantage of the federal courts. We do not need to create yet another layer of reviews so that their lawyers can drag the government through endless litigation during this time of war. Our legislation allows detainees to have a personal representative for periodic reviews, and that is consistent with the Geneva Conventions and our current handling of the detainees in Afghanistan. We also have several concerns with the role of the Department of Justice. Our military and intelligence community, not the Department of Justice, should be leading our law of war detention and intelligence gathering efforts. The Department of Justice should not be involved in determining the national security threat an individual poses to the United States or their potential intelligence value. Our legislation provides for a panel of military officers with expertise in operation, intelligence, and counterterrorism to make related to the law of war detention. I also mention as a former member of the Army JAG Corps, as well as my colleague here, we have an amazing group of people, as was mentioned sort of earlier, that represent military legal community, and that's both prosecutors and defense. And one of the things that hopefully that we can come away with today is that the rule of law and due process would have the utmost respect and due diligence when it comes to the men and women who wear the uniform but also swear to uphold and defend the Constitution and our rules of law. So thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Bobby Schilling. I represent the Illinois 17th District, which borders the Thompson Prison Facility. First, I would like to thank Chairman McKeon for putting together the Congressional Task Force on Gitmo. As was mentioned, the President took unilateral action without consulting Congress on how to deal with the remaining terrorists in Gitmo. I find this totally unacceptable. And first of all, what I really want to do is thank the American people for the votes that allowed us 87 new freshmen to become members of Congress and basically ensure that Gitmo will remain closed to the terrorists, and then also that we make sure that we handle these folks through the military tribunals. I'm working with Chairman McKeon to introduce this legislation that will handle the detainees and specifically stop funding for the construction or modification of any facilities inside the United States to house Gitmo detainees. In other words, this legislation would mean no detainees in Thompson, Illinois, or anywhere in the United States, its territories or possessions, except for in Guantanamo Bay. So I visited Gitmo, and it's a pretty nice facility. There was always one of the things I always asked during the campaign is the fact that number one is why are we closing Gitmo? And then will it make America any safer by bringing some of the world's most terrible people here? And I was unable to get a response to that. But I'm confident that this bill will ensure that these terrorists will be dealt with in the best interest of the United States. Thank you.
Tim Griffin from Arkansas 2. I am currently serving as a JAG officer in the Army Reserve, but I do not speak for the Army here today. But I speak in favor of this legislation. A critical part of what is going on down at Gitmo and in law of war detention is not just to detain the individuals, but to collect intelligence that can help keep America safe. And the criminal justice system does not allow us to fully obtain the intelligence that we might gather through the intelligence procedures under the law of war. This legislation will require military custody of individuals who can be detained under the law of war to make sure that we are getting the information that we need to keep Americans safe. Obviously, the threats that we're facing today have no borders. We are at war, We must continue to take the fight to the enemy overseas, wherever we may find them. But as we've seen, the enemy is trying their best to get to us here in the United States. We need to be prepared for that, and our legislation is a recognition and the first step in reprioritizing intelligence gathering over traditional law enforcement, and that is a critical distinction. We have included a waiver in this legislation that allows the Secretary of Defense to determine that someone that could be held under the law of war, that they should go into the criminal justice system. But the default is that these individuals should be brought into a system where the law of war governs. They're in military custody, and being in military custody will allow for continuous and comprehensive intelligence gathering. They won't have to immediately go to a judge, for example, as they would have to in the civilian or in the criminal justice world. They don't get Miranda rights read to them. It is a different construct under the law of war that recognizes the difference between war and evidence gathering on the streets of an American city. Thank you.
Thank you. And do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In that executive order, the President also stressed that he wanted to try some of these 9/11 suspects in Article III criminal courts, and he said he would work with Congress to try to get some of these people tried in the United States. Do you ever see that happening?
I hope not.
Do you think that there would be any way in which Congress could work to see some terrorist suspects tried in the United States?
You know, I shouldn't be flippant about this. I think I have condemned the President for not working with us. I think it would be pretty hypocritical to say we shouldn't work with him. I think we should work together to work on this problem, and I'd be happy to work with him. As I said, we're going to be reaching out to Democrats on the committee and in the Congress, working with them, and I'm happy to work with the President. We're all Americans. We all hopefully want the same result, protection of our constituents. Yes.
Senator McCain is working on a proposal that will probably likely be unveiled this week with Senator Lieberman and Senator Graham that deals with things like trial locations and other detainee issues. It seems like that's going to be pretty different from what you are proposing today. Are you working with them at all on this?
I am. I've met with both Senator McCain and Senator Graham, and we're very close on working together on this.
I just wanted, if I might, to the first question. You know, for me personally, it comes down to a fundamental issue of procedure when you're talking about Article III courts and trying detainees in the United States versus in a military commission down at Guantanamo. When you deal with issues of evidence gathering, discovery, and whether or not jurisdiction would attach to them and the full onslaught of the constitutional rights that we all enjoy versus where they are now in Cuba becomes an issue of potentially threatening our national security, in that we are all accustomed to being able to contradict the evidence brought against us or face our accusers. Oftentimes that evidence or the accuser cannot be revealed due to national security issues, and to bring them to, say, New York City or any other American city would avail them of constitutional rights, which would throw that out of the window. And then the problem that you run in there, obviously, is that sources and agents may be outed, evidence gathering may be called into question, and so with military commissions, you're able to guarantee full due process without the same safeguards that we enjoy here.
You mentioned the waiver for the Defense Secretary. Have you been in touch with anyone at the Pentagon or the administration about this legislation?
Not in detail, but we have talked to them. Yeah.
Do you have a timetable for when you want to move this, and is there any required coordination with Judiciary or Intelligence, or is this exclusively your jurisdiction?
No, it would be under our jurisdiction, and our timeline is, the floor is going to be pretty busy, and we're scheduled to have our authorization bill on the floor in May, So we probably, it'll depend on how time works, whether we do it as a separate freestanding bill or roll it into the task authorization bill. But one way or another, we'll get it done this year. Yes?
Say that you're going to have a provision that would limit the transfer or release of detainees to other foreign countries unless the Secretary of Defense can certify that the host country meets certain criteria. I just wondered what those are. What are you looking for?
Well, we've been very concerned, for instance, of detainees that have been released to Yemen. The recidivism rate is very high. We would want to have guarantees that they would be able to keep them safe and provide them the same kind of humane treatment they get at Guantanamo, but at the same time limit them from having access back in the battlefield to turn right back around and start shooting us. Yes?
Do you know anything about the President's thoughts, the timing of this announcement, executive order, if it's at all connected to Congressman King's hearings on Thursday about radical Islam?
Has nothing to do with Congressman King's hearings. We've been hearing about this executive order for quite a while, and we wanted to wait and see what they finally did. I wrote a letter to the President asking him to not do that, to work with us. He chose to go that route, so...
I'm asking, do the executive order was at all times with this hearing to give Muslims more rights? Do you have any insight?
Let me say again, it has nothing to do with Representative King's hearings. It is tied with the executive order. We had asked the President, we had heard that one was going to be given. We had written to him asking him instead to work with us. He chose to go the executive order route, and we've been ready to go with this. So when he did that, instead of working with us, we're going to have to move forward with our alternative. Our alternative is this bill.
We can't know what the timing inside the White House was motivated by, of course. We're just executive order as it was.
Did anybody have any thoughts on the President suddenly announcing it 2 days before?
We've been hearing about this executive order being forthcoming since.
Mr. Cicilline.
Very difficult to determine what some of this.
Mr. Cicilline votes aye.
Seems like you haven't done so. Have you done so? And what are your plans to work with the Democrats on the committee?
We work very hard to keep our committee
vote, the yeas are 401, the nays are 12.
And everything that we do.
Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. The unfinished business is the vote on the motion by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Burgess, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 525, in which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar number 10, H.R. 525, a bill to amend the Public Health Service Act to enhance and increase the number of veterinarians trained in veterinary public health.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? The members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 5-minute vote.
The second and last recorded vote of the day on a bill designating veterinarians in emergency response situations. The House is back tomorrow. A joint meeting with the Senate to hear from the Australian Prime Minister. We'll also begin debate on 2 measures that would end federal mortgage assistance programs. The White House late today issued a veto threat on those 2 bills. Meanwhile, in the Senate, there's some movement on the budget front. Senate leaders reaching agreement to vote on H.R. 1, the House-passed bill, to fund the federal government for the rest of 2011, and also a test vote on the Democratic alternative. It'll all get underway at noon Eastern or so in the U.S. Senate. Just ahead of that announcement today, we spoke to a Capitol Hill reporter who's been covering the ongoing budget debate on Capitol Hill. We're joined by Kate Hunter of Roll Call. Senate Democrats and Republicans have been negotiating the last couple of days on the 2 competing proposals to fund the federal government through September 30th. How are the votes shaping up for each of these proposals?
Well, as you said, there's two proposals. There's a Republican proposal, which is the House-passed bill, which would cut $61 billion off of actual spending levels. And then there's a Democratic alternative that would cut $10.5 billion. One would venture to think that the votes would come down mostly along party lines, but the interesting question is, whether there are going to be Republicans that either don't vote for the Republican proposal or Democrats that don't vote for, the Democratic proposal or might cross over and support the Republican bill.
Have any of those senators on either side, those sort of centrist Democrats and moderate Republicans, given any indication of how they're going to vote?
I spoke with Ben Nelson earlier, who is obviously a moderate Democrat and someone that, tends to, take his time to figure out how he's going to vote, doesn't necessarily vote the party line. And he said that earlier today that he, was still figuring out how he was going to vote. I think there's, this one could be a little bit interesting to watch on the floor in terms of who votes how.
Well, what happens once those test votes are taken in the Senate? What's the next step?
Well, the test votes are really just that. They're a test. They're meant to lay down a marker and sort of message. The idea being that, John Boehner here in the House can go back to his caucus and say the way he would put it is that, the Senate Democrats blocked the House-passed bill. And, then also if the Democratic bill doesn't pass, which it probably won't, that will give Democrats an opportunity to go back to the drawing board as well and say, okay, well, there's not the votes in the Senate for $61 billion, there's not the votes in the Senate for $10.5 billion. How do we begin to start trying to figure out how to meet in the middle? Well,
House leadership must be anticipating something, because there's word today that Republicans are beginning to work on another short-term extension, to last beyond the 18th. Why are they working on it now?
Well, they're working on it now because March 18th, when the current two-week funding resolution expires, is actually not that far away, particularly when you start looking at it in legislative terms. I think that one of the interesting things that happened today is that Majority Leader Reid in the Senate said that he would be opposed to a second short-term CR. The House, they enacted a short-term two-week CR at the end of last week that goes through the end of next week. That gives them really just a very short window of time to work out things. And here we are already on Tuesday night, and the Senate hasn't even held its test votes, let alone figure out how to move forward in a real substantive way on passing a 7-month spending bill. So it's looking like March 18th is going to be here before we know it, and they're not going to have all of this worked out. So the interesting thing to watch will be whether or not Leader Reid is going to stick to his guns in terms of not allowing a second short-term funding resolution, because that could bring the possibility of a government shutdown back on the table.
Kate Hunter of Roll Call with an update on where things stand on the temporary spending bills for fiscal year 2011. Thanks for the update.
Thanks so much.
And again, since that conversation with Kate Hunter, Senate leaders have reached an agreement to vote on both the House-passed measure and a Democratic alternative. CQ says that at noon on Wednesday, the Senate will proceed to H.R. 1, the House bill, with 3 hours of debate prior to a passage vote. If the measure doesn't achieve 60 votes, then senators would vote on a Democratic substitute, also with a 60-vote threshold. And you can, of course, follow Senate debate on that tomorrow on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. In the U.S. House, they are wrapping up the second of 2 recorded votes, this one on designating veterinarians in emergency response situations, and that'll do it for votes this evening, recorded votes anyway. Tomorrow they will be back to meet with the U.S. Senate in a joint meeting to hear from the Australian Prime Minister, and that is 11 o'clock Eastern tomorrow. They'll also begin debate on a couple of bills that would end federal mortgage assistance programs, and look for rule debate and votes on the rules tomorrow in the U.S. House, although the White House has issued, as of today, veto threats against those bills. One more note on the budget, too. A couple of different views on the fiscal year 2011 budget tomorrow in the Washington Journal. We're going to hear from Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold and also from Vermont Senator, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders. All of that tomorrow on Washington Journal, which gets underway at 7 a.m. Eastern.
On this vote, the yeas are 280, the nays are 138. Two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Members, kindly take their conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. Will members please vacate the well? Connecticut, right? The House will be in order. For what purpose does the gentleman from Connecticut rise?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Democratic Caucus, I offer a privilege resolution and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Resolution 149, resolution electing a member to a certain standing committee of the House of Representatives.
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be considered as read and printed in the record.
Without objection, the resolution is agreed to and the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Will the House please come to order?
Would you like to do it again?
Will members and staff please vacate the well? For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah rise?
Mr. Speaker, I send to the desk 2 privilege reports from the Committee on Rules for filing under the rule.
Clerk will report.
Report to accompany House Resolution 150, resolution provided for consideration of the bill H.R. 830 to rescind the unobligated funds for the FHA refinance program and to terminate the program. Report to accompany House Resolution 151. Resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 836 to rescind the unobligated funds for the Emergency Mortgage Relief Program and to terminate the program.
Refer to the House calendar and order printed. Chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leaves of absence requested for Mr. Hanna of New York for today and Mr. Reichert of Washington for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted.
The House will be in order. The Chair will entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Hampshire seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my home state of New Hampshire, I have had the pleasure of talking to many constituents over the course of the last several days who have expressed their great concern relative to the rising gas prices, not just in New Hampshire but all across the country. Just today, gas prices are now at $3.45 a gallon minimum. This and many Congresses have failed its obligation and responsibility to have an approach to solving the energy crisis and the energy challenges that are before us. And I call both on this body and the President of the United States to come with an all-of-the-above energy policy so we can once and for all look the American people in the eye, my constituents in New Hampshire, and give them hope for a true reduction, not just in gas prices, but to have long-term sustainability and viability from our own country in how we have our oil and other opportunities to reduce our energy, our dependence on foreign oil. This is something that is critical not just today and in the coming weeks, but it's been critical for our nation's infrastructure as well as our economy. And I again hope that this body acts swiftly and promptly. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Stutzman, is recognized for 60 minutes as designated the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to represent the people of Indiana's 3rd District, and I'm also proud to serve as a co-chair of the Constitution Caucus here in Congress. The hottest fires make the strongest steel. After seeing Washington assail the Constitution, Americans went to the polls last November and demanded a return to our first principles. As a result, the membership of this caucus has more than doubled. We began this Congress by reading the Constitution right here on the floor. We have come here this evening in that same spirit. I rise today to continue a conversation that used to fill the halls of this great building. There was a time in our nation's past when members of our Congress openly and passionately debated the interpretation of the Constitution. We are here tonight to renew that discussion. When we were sworn in, each of us took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. This means that we are required to interpret and apply it to our daily work. I am sure that we all take that oath very seriously. However, I'm also sure that without vigilance, we slip out of tune with the principles enshrined in that founding document. Today, we have an opportunity to rededicate ourselves to those principles, to limited government and individual equality. In the coming months, my colleagues and I will come again to the floor to discuss federalism, checks and balances, and enumerated powers. Today, however, we ought to begin by asking ourselves a very simple question. What is so wonderful about the Constitution? After all, I believe the last election was a mandate to return to its wisdom and its guidance. We ought to at least begin by asking why it should hold such prominence in our hearts. Why, for example, did Abraham Lincoln declare so forcefully, "Don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties"? The answer is elegantly simple. The Constitution enshrines the enduring principles of limited government, and limited government is the surest guardian of human dignity. the Constitution gave form and shape to the philosophy put forth in the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration, it has been said, was the promise. The Constitution is the fulfillment. I cannot overemphasize the truly revolutionary nature of our war for independence. For the first time in human history, when a group of people overthrew an oppressive regime, they began by espousing a vigorous and eloquent philosophy that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Even as lives, fortunes, and sacred honor hung in the balance, these men began with a summary of human nature. America was founded on the idea that humans have a specific character. We are wired a certain way. Our founding fathers understood two basic and profound truths about human nature. First, we are not perfect. We err. We will never reach perfection. To believe that man is perfectible is to engage in fanciful speculation. Second, in spite of our fallen natures, we are dignified and equal. We each possess reason and the ability to determine our own lives. As James Madison, the father of the Constitution, eloquently stated, "What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. How then can imperfect beings govern in a way that respects human dignity? The answer is found in limited government." Again, James Madison said this, "You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself. Limited government justly defends the dignity of the individual through specific and checked powers. Do not confuse limited for weak. Government ought to be strong in those areas where strength is required and specifically enumerated. In all other areas, the government must defer to the judgments of free men and women. In our republic, the dignity of the individual citizen is paramount. It would be arrogant to believe that a few elite can discern and direct over 300 million souls here in America. I fear with ballooning government and near unstoppable deficits being run every year, we are dangerously close to abandoning the principles that brought us here safely thus far. As regulations infringe on nearly every aspect of daily life, human dignity is endangered. Those of us here this evening are ready to work against this tide, to return our government to its proper role of defending individual freedoms. I am eager to continue this conversation in the coming months, because there is much work to be done. And Mr. Speaker, I would now like to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, the original founder of this caucus, Mr. Garrett, and I yield him such time as he may consume.
And I thank the gentleman from Indiana for being here tonight as we talk about the Constitution. And who was it that said that the Constitution, it may not be perfect, but it's better than what we have now? Anyway, as we talk about kicking off tonight's special order, this series here in the 112th Congress, I'm pleased to be here with my colleague from Indiana and my colleague also from behind me, Mr. Bishop from Utah, to talk about these most important issues, the foundations of the Constitution. You know, back at the very beginning when, I guess it was back in 04 or 05, really, there really were not that many Americans talking about the proper role of the Constitution and the limitations that it does place both on the size and also on the scope of the federal government. But as the years went by, over the last several years at least, interest in the Constitution has grown as new government programs have whittled away basically at the protections in the Constitution that guarantee to us the certain liberties to the people and the authorities to the states. So as we come here tonight and as we have pointed out in the past, we will continue to highlight until Congress's recent course is reversed. This body has drifted away from the principles of limited government enshrined in the Constitution. This document, the finely crafted sections and verses that are in it, the guidelines and the limitations that we see in it of the powers of government it was written to impose, does not have the same personal meaning and importance to Americans, it seems, it had during the times of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates. Is that because it is a different time and now we're in a different age where we have long since forgotten what it's like to live under the tyrannical rule? Maybe. But because, Mr. Speaker, because of that, or perhaps otherwise, it could also be because we don't simply cherish and study the Constitution like our forefathers once did. So, we come to the floor tonight through these Constitution hours, if you will. And we hope to, by them, increase the knowledge not only of this body, but also of the American public as well. And we do so taking a look at the intricacies and the nuances of this, the Constitution. And I think we also help to shed some light on the circumstances and the times that inspired the Founding Fathers to write our country's founding document. So tonight, we specifically want to spend some time talking about limited government and its role in protecting human dignity. Liberty to all, President Lincoln once wrote back in, I think it was 1861, is the summation of what? Well, of the Declaration of Independence. And he said further, the principles which have proved an apple of gold to all of us. Yet these mere assertions of that principles for him was not enough. As Lincoln later pointed out, for liberty to have real meaning, it must be enshrined, and it must be enshrined in law. So the Constitution, as he put it, is the picture of silver subsequently framed around, and then he went on to say that the picture was made not to conceal or to destroy the apple that were framed, but rather what? To adorn and to preserve it, he went on. So this, Lincoln said, drawing upon the book of Proverbs, is a word fitly spoken. So to understand America, you must understand our founding principles. To understand the Constitution and why government should be limited, you must then therefore understand also the Declaration of Independence. So the structure of the Constitution follows the principles and the arguments of the Declaration, where it says, of course, all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. This great statement that we're hopefully all familiar with at the outset of the Declaration, a truly revolutionary claim at the time, is then what? It's followed by a list of complaints lodged against the king at that time, King George III. And just to spend a moment or two to go into this in a little bit more detail, and to delve down into it, these then can be divided into three categories, corresponding with the legislative, executive, and judicial functions of government. So, to step back for a moment, the list takes up over half of the Declaration, and the complaints there specify exactly where their king had failed. And so, too, why government by consent is therefore necessary. Now, he refused to enact necessary laws, they said. Harmful ones took their places, they said. Judges entirely dependent upon the king's will were rendered mere puppets at the time. And when the king did act, he flooded American shores with soldiers and bureaucrats. The complaints there were specific. The king suspended representative houses for opposing with many firmnesses invasion on the rights of the people, it wrote. It went on to say he obstructed the administration of justice. How? By refusing his assent of laws for establishing judiciary powers. It went on to say he was also guilty of what? Imposing taxes on us without our consent, and also suspending our very own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with powers to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. Yet another complaint alleged against the king was that he, quote, erected a multitude of new offices and thereby sent hither swarms of officers to harass the people and eat out their substance. So, when all power is taken from the hands of the people and accumulated in the hands of a single person, or a single head, if you will, it breeds a similar power grab by who else? The bureaucrats, who have no job but to consume the productivity and resources of the people, of the populace. So the overweening federal government today is guilty of the same offenses of liberty as back then as well. Americans who were desperately trying to figure out and file their own income taxes right now, returns, know this all too well, I think. And so the Declaration anticipates what we have here, the necessity of separation of powers and a just society. So its message is clear. No single person or political force can rightfully possess all the powers of the one government. Only the divine, it's only the divine who is named in the Declaration of Independence as the authors of the laws of nature, also named as the creator, also named as the supreme judge of the entire world, and finally also named as divine providence. Only the divine justly exerts complete power. But in the hands of a human being, such power is, as it's stated there, absolute despotism. Our founding fathers did not believe that human beings could be perfected. We were not divine. We were capable of both good and evil. James Madison later wrote in defense of the Constitution, quote, "As there is a degree of depravity in mankind which requires a certain degree of circumspection and distrust, so there are other qualities in human nature which justify a certain portion of esteem and of confidence," end quote. So to assume that man's goodness will always direct his actions is to ignore reality. People, therefore, are imperfect and cannot be perfected. And so no edict of government will change that fundamental fact. So to step back again, what then is the role of government? Calling government the greatest of all reflections of human nature, James Madison said that the government must start where? Well, with the understanding that men are not angels, as the gentleman from Indiana stated before. And as he said, were they perfect or angelic, no government would be necessary. Jefferson, Madison's friend, implicitly argued the same thing in the Declaration. So today, when we speak of the government, we often think of an impersonal force, somehow out there and above everything, above human nature, if you will. But what is government? Government is composed of what you see here, composed of human beings, all of which are, what? Imperfect. And so to be in the public sector or to be elected to office does not automatically, by any means, transform a human being into that angel. And so for that very same reason, that human beings are not perfect, government, therefore, must be limited, and its duties, therefore, must be delineated. Going back to what President Lincoln once said, he further elaborated on the importance of human dignity, which is our discussion tonight, back in 1861, where he said a couple things. And I'll close on this. Without the Constitution and the Union, we cannot have attained the result. But even these are not the primary cause of our great prosperity. There's something back of these, intertwining itself more closely about the human heart. And what is that? That something is the principle of liberty to all. The principle that clears the path for all and gives hope to all, and by consequence, enterprise and industry to all. So, over the course of this 112th Congress, this caucus and my colleagues from hopefully both sides of the aisle will continue to sponsor these discussions, these Constitution hours, if you will, to expand upon our understanding of these core principles of limited government enshrined in our Constitution. And so, the Speaker, and so the gentleman from Indiana, I appreciate this opportunity to speak tonight on this very important topic, and I yield back to the gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you, and it's my pleasure to yield now to fellow chair, co-chair of the Constitutional Caucus, the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Bishop. I yield him such time as he may consume.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman from Indiana. Chairman, it's a pleasure for me to, Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, it's a pleasure for me to be here and be part of this significant issue. You know, in the Constitution it says that certain things are self-evident. And what are the things that were self-evident in the Declaration of Independence? I got to get the words right, don't I? In the Declaration of Independence, there are things that are self-evident. And what was self-evident is that all men are created equal in a political sense. And because of that, because all men are equal, the Creator has given us all certain inalienable rights. And then it goes on to say the next step in that process is once you have those inalienable rights, it is the purpose of government to secure those rights. That's what we're talking about here. Within the concept of our country, which was written and established in the brilliant prose of Thomas Jefferson, every individual has an innate, almost divine worth within them, which signifies that they all have certain rights that are there from the Creator. In England, those rights were established in law, starting with the Magna Carta and then building on, so that at the time of our country's founding, everyone knew what the rights of Englishmen were. Our Revolutionary War was not about taxes being too high. It was not, as some revisionist historians will say, about impressment of colonials into the British Navy. It was about the rights of Englishmen, which were being denied British subjects living in America at the time. That's what they argued about. That's what in Philadelphia they were talking about, is the denial of those individual rights which are basic to all people, because we all have that spark of divinity and we have those inalienable rights. That's why, as part of the debate was established, there was an exchange in which Benjamin Franklin took part, in which he was talking with another person that said, oh, there are more important things in life than simply having our rights protected. The fact is we are British citizens, to which Franklin then said, to be called a British citizen without given the rights of a British citizen is like calling an ox a bull. He is grateful for the honor but would much rather have restored what was rightfully his. That's the key element to which we are talking here. With that, the Constitution was written as a fortification of those individual rights and freedoms. And it is the purpose of limited government to protect those individual liberties. The Constitution created limited government, the purpose of which was to protect our individual liberties. Now, as I try and talk to my old students, to try and sometimes define the term individual liberties, because it becomes somewhat vague in the minds of people, I look at individual liberties as the concept that individuals have choices in their personal lives. It is not the role of government to pick winners and losers in society, whether that be socially or economically. That is our rights as individuals. It is the right to have choices in my life. You know, I look in the world in which we are, and it seems like all the time I'm given choices and options, even when I don't want them. I can pick a cell phone plan from a myriad of options that are there. If I want a breakfast cereal, there's a whole row of choices that are there. Even if I want Pringles potato chips, there are 16 kinds of varieties for me. The entrepreneurial world has understood that people in America want choices and options. That's their liberty. It is only government, especially here in Washington, that seems to see that one size fits all and mandates, so that the government chooses winners and losers rather than allowing that for individual. It is only us that seem to not learn what is yearning within the soul of all Americans, that they understood when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and then formalized the Constitution of the United States. I wish to quote someone here, and I don't know who actually wrote this, but it's brilliant, so I'm going to claim that I said it. But in the first 150 years of this country, under the Constitution, we can sum up in the following way. In the early years of this country, measures to expand government's power beyond those enumerated in the Constitution rarely got out of Congress because they were stopped by the objections in that branch, constitutional objections in Congress. Members of Congress actually debated whether they had the power to do whatever it was that was being proposed. They didn't simply assume they had the power, then leave it to the courts to check them. Congress took the Constitution and the limits it imposed on congressional action seriously. Then, when constitutionally dubious bills did by chance get out of Congress, presidents vetoed them, not simply on policy, but on constitutional grounds. Indeed, the first The first 6 presidents thought the veto was supposed to be used only for constitutional purposes. And finally, when that break failed, the court stepped in. In short, the system of checks and balances worked because the Constitution was taken seriously by a sufficient number of those who had sworn to uphold it. We seem to have forgotten that in probably the last 60, 70, maybe even 100 years. If I could give a religious reference, sometimes the children of Israel, as we read in the Old Testament, wanted to have a king so they could be likened to all other nations. And they went to the prophet who tried to dissuade them, but now they were insistent that they had a king to be likened to all other nations. So the king could do marvelous things, and indeed they had a king. And the first kings did great things. They unified a nation. They built a beautiful temple. But ultimately, those kings became the millstone around the neck of the people that brought them down to destruction. We have a change that took place almost 100 years ago where people decided to change what the federal government was designed to do. It is not that they did not understand the Constitution. They understand it perfectly. They just didn't like it because it prohibited us from doing marvelous things. We have now run through almost 2 generations, 3 generations of individuals under a system of government in which we look not to limit what government does to protect individual liberties, but to try and make sure that government does those marvelous things. And we have come to a period of time where economically and socially we are now in a period of distress simply because we forgot the original foundation of this country, the purpose of the Constitution, the joy and brilliance of limited government whose sole purpose should be to protect individual liberties, not for government to do marvelous things. If we restore ourselves to that purpose and reinvigorate the concepts for which this country was established, which I do believe to be the concepts of federalism and limited government here, then indeed we have a chance of restoring this country and solving our problems. If not, we face very dark and difficult times indeed. For the first 150 years, they understood that. They acted that way. We can do the same thing again. We have the same spark of divinity within us they had back then. We can do it. We should do it. I thank you for this opportunity of being here. I know you have other speakers who are going to go on to this particular issue far more eloquently than I, and I yield back to the gentleman from Indiana.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Next, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from South Carolina, District 3, Jeff Duncan. And I yield to him as